Welcome to the Health Science Podcast, sponsored by the National Health Association. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, and today I'm absolutely delighted to have as my guest Dr. Steve Blake. Dr. Steve is a PhD in holistic health with a specialization in nutritional biochemistry, which we're going to get into. He's also a trained naturopathic physician. And Steve also works as the director of nutritional neuroscience at the Maui Memory Clinic in Hawaii, which I want to get into because neuroscience is one of my loves and one of the places I spent a lot of time in. Also, the research director of neuroscience at the Neuroscience Nutrition Foundation. He's a prolific author, and we're going to talk a little bit about the work that he's done with books ranging from Nutrients for Memory, Autism, a Spectrum of Improvement, Dietary Regulation of Dopamine, Nutritional Approach to Alzheimer's Disease, No More Heart Attacks, and many more. So Steve, welcome. It's such a pleasure to have you. Welcome to the Health Science Podcast, brought to you by the National Health Association, the oldest organization in the world, championing the extraordinary benefits of a whole plant food diet and healthy lifestyle, as well as water-only fasting. We believe that health results from healthful living and focus on evidence-based science that promotes the health of you and your loved ones, as well as the health of all animals and the environment. We feature experts from a cross-section of disciplines within the plant nutrition, vegan, psychological, environmental, and animal compassion sectors. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, the NHA's Director of Health Education.
Thank you. Thank you for having me here.
Steve, I'd like to start off letting people know, I know it's been probably a life journey for you. Let's go back into where your interests in nutritional biochemistry and actually probably even in plant-based nutrition really have their beginnings for you. Where does that really start for you? And what were the aha moments or the things that inspired that journey?
Okay. Well, I'm really kind of just starting out on my plant food journey. It's only been 54 years that I've been eating this way. So I hope to be able to live longer and eat plant foods for even longer. So I started in 1970.
With being plant-based, you mean?
Yes.
Wow, so that's going way back. So what was the impetus for that?
Well, the impetus was I was studying at physics at University of California, Santa Cruz, and I made a chicken cacciatore. I'd already stopped other meats, and I left it out and didn't heat it up again and got food poisoning.
Oh, that'll do it.
And I realized this stuff can really be dangerous. And plus, I was always really disgusted by them torturing and killing animals for my food anyway. So in 1970, when you couldn't buy tofu or any alternate meats or anything like that, I decided that I'm going whole plant foods.
And that included even dairy and that component too? No eggs, no cheese, none of it?
Yes, that did include that.
Well, that was a pretty radical shift, Steve. So back then, what were you doing? Eating rice and beans? What was going on?
Yeah, my family doctor said, "You will die."
Yeah, of course. Yes, from protein deficiency and mineral deficiency.
Rice and beans, vegetables, lots of fruit. Yeah. It really isn't that hard, and it's a lot of fun.
Have you seen that translate into major benefits in your own health? Were there any health concerns through the years that you had to deal with, or was this something that kind of kept all of that at bay for you?
It seems so far, and knock on wood, I seem very healthy for a 74-year-old gentleman. I'm still able to run for an hour, and that's a good exercise, and I'm glad my joints can still take that kind of punishment. I seem to be in very good health, and it's funny, doctors never congratulate you for not having to take any medicines, but I don't.
Right. Well, they feel you're such an outlier, they don't even want to deal with you. You understand what I'm saying? It's kind of like, oh my God, you get somebody, think about our culture. People in their 70s spend most of their lives running from one doctor to another and then on a garbage bag full of medication. So the idea that someone could live without that and thrive in their 70s and even into their 80s, et cetera, is such an outlier for most of the way typical modern medicine is carried out, especially when most doctors are disease managers. If they have no disease to manage, they don't know what to do. They're
Good point.
confused. They're
Excellent.
confused. They're confused. Well, I noticed that you bridged a couple of things that are kind of intriguing to me because you bridged the nutritional biochemistry with the neuroscience, and I really want to get into how you made that happen for you because I see that you're a director of nutritional neuroscience at this Maui Memory Clinic. Talk to me a
Yes.
little bit about how you segued through your professional life into the neuroscience arena with your interest in nutritional biochemistry. How did that come to be?
Well, 10 or 15 years ago, I was on Oahu giving a lecture at Castle Medical Center on nutrition and Alzheimer's disease. And the director of the largest, it's called Hawaii Pacific Neuroscience, largest neuroscience center in the Pacific, came and while I was prepping for the lecture, came in and peppered me with questions, beepers and pagers going off all over the place. And he really liked what I was doing. And he said, we would be foolish not to include what you're doing in our neuroscience center. So he basically set me up. He booked me solid at the clinic and hired me as faculty neuroscience nutrition. That's it. And so I stayed there and I learned and taught there for many years.
Well, and I noticed that you've had a very extensive experience teaching at a number of places. You taught at the University of Hawaii, you taught at
Yes.
Stanford, you taught at Boston University. You've
Yes.
done medical rounds in some of these major medical centers across the
Yes.
country. All of that has been really quite impressive. That also impressive that the powers that be attached to these facilities were really open-minded enough to have you come in and do that, because oftentimes they just kind of shut down with anything kind of alternative to this. In your teaching, were you involving a mentality of plant-based nutrition as a major part of that they were open to, or did you do it a different way?
Well, yes, but the people I see are almost universally not vegan or vegetarian.
Right, of course
So
not.
what we're doing is we're going in a direction toward whole plant food, but how far they'll go and how fast they'll go, my personal feeling is I would love people to go all the way tomorrow. And a few have, but I don't want to scare anyone away. And so we work carefully with people. And a lot of times, and I'm sure you've seen this too, when they make a small change, like one lady, she had a post COVID brain fog that was so bad, it was borderline dementia. She's only 52 years old,
Uh,
uh, a professional woman. And we talked to her about inflammation in the brain and what foods cause inflammation and how to reduce that inflammation, because that's generally the way that COVID damages people is through
right,
inflammation. So she just stopped eating beef and pork, but kept eating chicken and fish. But the difference was night and day. And not only did we notice it, and a neuropsychologist here in the clinic noticed it, but she noticed it and her family noticed it, that it was a huge difference. Instead of a 9-second delay before she could start to answer a question, she was right on it.
right.
And she hadn't gone all the way. I don't know if she ever will. She has a family, she has history and traditions, and we continue to educate her on why it would be better if she could move toward a whole food plant diet. And notice I don't say plant-based, because the word
I don't either.
plant-based diet, that has been misused. And now in medical papers, I'm reading that to indicate even pescatarian and Mediterranean
Yeah,
diets
it's
that
terrible. That's why I like the word plant exclusive. I never use plant-based ever because it doesn't really speak to the truth of what we're talking about.
and
Some
if
of
you
those,
say whole plant, then you're getting toward healthier plant foods rather than vegan junk foods, which
that's right.
we all know exist.
Well, some of those corollaries that you describe, and no one wants to talk about it, but some of those are byproducts of even vaccination programs, and no one really wants to talk about that. But some of those complications that people were calling with long COVID, like even neuropathy, I was seeing in people that were doing multiple vaccination programs too. So, no one wanted to address any of that. No one wanted to really, because if you addressed it, it was a conspiracy. But the sad part was when you looked at some of the epidemiological data in a wide variety of countries, people eating plant exclusive were at the lowest level of mortality and morbidity with that infection. And the
And one
sad,
of my books
yeah,
addresses that exactly.
and the sad commentary is that no one of all those talking heads even shared that information with the population. And if anyone
excuse
even
me,
brought,
excuse me, Dr. Sabatino, how profitable would it be for them to do that?
no, it's not. But I mean, when you think about it, anyone who brought
That's
that
the
up,
point.
it was a conspiracy when the true conspiracy was distracting people away from lifestyle measures that would be incredibly helpful, including fresh air, physical activity, plant exclusive eating, all of that. You know what I'm saying? So,
I
yeah,
wrote a book on the subject. It's called Beyond COVID, Beyond the Mask, How to Survive COVID-19. And I talk about how food can quench inflammation in the body and other foods increase inflammation in the body. And it is inflammation and that cytokine storm that we don't want to have damage us if we do run into COVID. Also, very important, there are nutrients that strengthen the immune system, especially age-related decline in immune power. And so it is the old folks who are suffering the most from COVID and other flus and other diseases. And we can boost our immune system. And just as you pointed out perfectly, our medical system doesn't do that. We have to do it.
yeah, okay. We're going to take just a very short break to hear from our sponsor, the National Health Association, and we'll be right back. You're listening to the NHA Health Science Podcast. Dr. Frank Sabatino here. Are you ready for an extraordinary adventure that combines relaxation, exploration, and vibrant health? Then set your sails for the NHA Plant Exclusive Cruises. Imagine cruising through exotic destinations, savoring delectable plant-based cuisine, and engaging in rejuvenating activities, all while surrounded by like-minded individuals passionate about health and wellness. These cruises offer more than just a vacation. They offer an opportunity to immerse yourself in the NHA's principles of healthy living. And they rank incredibly high on the ratings of eco-friendly cruise lines. We all know how important our oceans are, and our cruise partner Windstar is fully committed to this. Join us aboard our upcoming plant-exclusive cruises and experience the synergy of health and leisure. Delight in gourmet SOS-free meals prepared by talented chefs. Attend informative workshops and enjoy the serenity of the sea, all tailored to nourish your body, mind, and spirit. For more details and to reserve your spot on our next adventure, visit healthscience.org and click the link under travel. Don't miss this chance to indulge in a wellness retreat like no other. Elevate your well-being and make memories that will last a lifetime. And remember, your feedback matters. Please take a moment to leave a rating and a review wherever you're listening to the NHA Health Science Podcast. I'm Dr. Frank Sabatino, your host. Now, back to the show. Welcome back to the Health Science Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, and I'm here with Dr. Steve Blake, a nutritional biochemist, and we just finished a moderate discussion about COVID and the role of chronic inflammation for increasing the morbidity and how nutritional approaches, especially plant exclusive, can kind of quench that cytokine storm that's tied into that chronic inflammatory exacerbation that goes on in that process. Steve, I noticed that and I'm very intrigued by this because we talk about, and we know that there's a lot of, as we see aging in our culture, we see a lot of age-related degeneration of the brain and nervous system. And of course, these problems that develop with that, whether it's cognitive decline, Alzheimer's, Parkinsonian symptoms, the way those typical problems are addressed and looked at typically never come in the arena of nutrition for most of the standard approaches of looking at that. They see them as just degenerative phenomena that no one can really stop. And so all that we do is treat them in end stages. And I know that you were involved in a dementia trial study. You dealt with some Alzheimer's studies. I'd love to talk to you about how you see the impact of nutritional biochemistry on some of those age-related or lifestyle-related factors of neurological degeneration. I think it's a really important discussion.
Ooh, that's just right up my alley. So
I feel
yes,
that.
I wrote the Hawaii Dementia Prevention Trial. And this is a randomized controlled clinical trial. And, we set it up with a huge team at Hawaii Pacific Neuroscience. And I'm the lead author of the paper, and I wrote the study, and I helped talk to people about it. But what we did is we used actually 12 different nutrients and 4 dietary changes. Now, I would have loved to do a whole plant food diet, but
Right.
it wasn't in the cards. A lot of people in Hawaii eat, well, very much as Americans eat. Lots of meat and cheese and white rice and this type of food. So we made 4 nutrient changes and we added 12 nutrients to them.
These are all in supplemental form. How was this done?
Both ways. For example, one of the things we added was an ounce of sunflower seeds and an ounce of walnuts to supply alpha tocopherol and gamma tocopherol, 2 forms of vitamin E in the diet. Coincidentally, we also supplied vitamin E in a supplement form, but not the synthetic junk that everyone calls vitamin E. Did you know that 99+% of the vitamin supplements that contain vitamin E do not contain vitamin E? They contain a synthetic analog called all-racemic alpha tocopherol.
Right.
That's made of 8 different parts, only 1 of which is real alpha tocopherol, and 4 of which are completely worthless. So in our trial, we used the real deal, which of course costs vastly more, but it was donated, so we used the good stuff. What happened in the trial, I want to tell you this first before I describe more of what we did, was we caught people. Now, the mini mental status exam has 30 points, and 25 to 30 is considered normal. 25 is considered mild cognitive impairment, sort of the precursor to dementia. People with mild cognitive impairment often move, about 15% of them, into dementia every year. So we started at an average of 19, okay, just barely into dementia. After 9 months, the average was 29 out of 30, high normal, not just normal. And this is just from nourishing people and taking some of the load off of them. So one of the things we did was reduce saturated.
So all groups, including the control group, were eating the same compromised diet. And all you did was add nutrients to this diet in some form?
No. We changed. We added the nuts I just told you about, sunflower seeds and walnuts to one group. We also added a cup of either blueberries, strawberries, or red grapes every day. Okay. And that's for anthocyanins that go into the brain and protect it from inflammation and oxidation. We also had our dietitians work carefully with people, and this was a tough one, to lower saturated fat intake. Over 9 months, saturated fat intake, if you lower it, you can really see a difference because you're unclogging the arteries. More blood is getting to the brain, more blood sugar, more oxygen. People are thinking clearer, and their whole circulation is better. Their chances of a stroke. And strokes, of course, if you have a lot of tiny strokes, this leads to vascular dementia, a very common side rider of Alzheimer's disease. So the saturated fat change in a diet was really helpful too.
Well, you're making an important point for the audience that I want to highlight, because I think sometimes when they talk about these neurological type diseases, they don't realize that they're not just neurological, they're neurovascular diseases, meaning that you're looking at blood supply to vital neurological tissue. So when you talk about blocking blood vessels because of inflammation and all of the changes, you're cutting off oxygen and blood supply to vital tissue. So it's not just a neurological breakdown, it's an entire neurovascular picture. And I think a lot of people, it's never really presented properly enough that way. And I'm glad that you're doing that because it's important.
The importance of vascular dementia is really high, and brain perfusion of oxygen, especially to the brain, very important. So I wrote a paper recently on advanced glycation end products. These form when meat is broiled or fried or barbecued, and they are highly inflammatory. In fact, the receptor that takes them into the brain is called RAGE. How do you like that?
Yeah, I know.
receptor for advanced glycation end products.
And
They
the
increase,
acronym AGE is associated with it too.
yes.
I spent years investigating AGEs in my own aging research. I spent 2 years doing that at the
Oh, you're
University.
going to love my paper. I
Yeah,
just put out a paper on, it's on my website, drsteveblake.com. Right at the top, I have recent papers, and I think I have 3 of my most recent ones there.
well, I'll
So,
look them up for sure, no question.
yeah, you're going to like that
The
one.
thing about the walnuts you did too is that you didn't highlight it, and I know you know this, but you're providing ALA too. The alpha
Yeah, of
linolenic
course.
acid is so critical for helping the body produce DHA, which is about 60% of the nerve cell membranes in the brain. So
Of
that's
the
a
fatty acids on the phospholipids in the nerve
that
cell
essential fatty
membranes.
acid is really critical for preventing cognitive decline. So, by adding that, it wasn't just the vitamin E component. You added that very essential anti-inflammatory omega-3 component, which is powerful, beautiful.
And I'm going to love talking about fats and oils with you too, because I wrote a book on fats and oils,
I saw that.
a textbook on fats and oils, and it's
So the bottom line of that trial is you saw incredible cognitive improvement, basically, is what you saw.
yes,
Very significant cognitive improvement.
such cognitive improvement that had it been a drug rather than changes in diet and nutrients, I would be a billionaire right now. I did
You would.
summarize this book, Nutrients for Memory, summarizes what we did in the trial, and you can do it at home. It doesn't cost very much, and you don't need a prescription for anything, and you can do the same thing we did at the trial.
And that's available where, Steve? Where is that available?
On my website, drsteveblake.com.
Yeah, we'll get to that too. We'll highlight that, drsteveblake.com.
I see
Steve,
it
let me ask you
scrolling
a
across.
question. In your dementia trial, did you see any gender discrepancies? And I'm going to tell you that because we know that in full-blown Alzheimer's, 2 out of 3 people with Alzheimer's are women. And there's a kind of a black box around that gender discrepancy. Some people feel it may relate to changes in estrogen and estrogen's protective effect on the brain. There's some very, very different discussions about what may be the reasons for that. So I'm asking you straight out, did you see any gender discrepancy in the study that you did and the outcome of that study?
No, we didn't. And generally in the literature, I haven't seen a lot of changes. As you mentioned, estrogen does have some effect on the mind, and the cessation of estrogen in menopause can also have an effect on the mind. But food is so powerful. It
Right.
is so incredibly powerful that this is a small thing compared with the changes in food and nutrients too. Can I talk a little bit about the nutrients we used?
Absolutely, please. Yes, it's your
Okay.
forum. I want you to share whatever you want to share.
So you've probably heard many times that we can be genetically susceptible to a disease, so we just forget it. You have nothing you can do about it. Not the case. There's something called epigenetics that's been out now for many years. And for example, there are genes that make the 2 enzymes that create the amyloid beta that turns into amyloid plaque, the signature feature of Alzheimer's disease. These 2 enzymes are beta secretase and gamma secretase. Those are the 2 that snip off the amyloid precursor protein and cause these incredibly toxic metabolites to circulate in the brain and kill off brain cells. The genes that make these can be quenched. They can be turned off. And the way we do that is we make sure we get enough vitamin B12 and folate, 2 B vitamins, cheap, safe B vitamins, real folate, not folic acid. And we did those in the trial. Those are 2 of the nutrients we made sure people had. What happens is
the process then is a process of methylation on those DNA base pairs, basically, because
there's a step before that. So what happens is the homocysteine is an undesirable blood chemical that often people have tested. And if you have high homocysteine, in fact, it's a risk factor for heart disease and Alzheimer's disease.
right.
But these 2 B vitamins can turn that into a substance called S-adenosyl methionine, SAM or SAMe. SAMe can methylate and quench the genes. So even if you have 4 times the risk from high genes or 10 times the risk from high genes, the genes are shut down. They don't create it. And you get an immediate effect because you're not creating more Alzheimer's amyloid beta to float around your brain, to fibrilize and aggregate. And that's
Right.
the point at which they really damage the brain. So just those two cheap, safe nutrients made a huge difference. And there were 2 of the 12 that we used.
Yes, and there's always been that controversy about B12 being lower in vegan populations. And so, the idea of the drive and the requirement to supplement B12 in vegan populations, again, it's interesting because not everybody has a B12 deficiency in terms of eating plant exclusive, but some people do. So you would advocate that depending on what that is, that there may be a need for the supplementation of that as a preventative for this SAMe methylation process that we're talking about.
I would go further. I would say that I have actually a software that I designed and wrote called a Diet Doctor, and I've been
Yeah, I want,
analyzing diet.
I want to talk to you about that later. We're going to
30
get into
years I've been analyzing diets, and I haven't seen any plant exclusive diets that have any vitamin B12 at all. Okay, it's not there. And you're right though, there is a delay when you cease taking in any vitamin B12. It's stored in the body for some time. You may not see neurological problems for 3 to 7 years. That doesn't mean it's okay to be without vitamin B12. We need
right.
it. It's safe, it's cheap. I certainly take it every day on my plant exclusive diet. And it is a required nutrient. To me, if something is required, you got to get it. And if you
No, I
don't like
agree.
vitamin D,
And I think most of the vegan physicians that are plant exclusive docs would agree. They would definitely recommend it. I know many of them will do measurements because one of the things that we've discovered is that B12 can be lower than normal levels in most blood labs, but most of the blood normals have been based on very sick populations. So what you're seeing is basically typical, but not necessarily normal. And the thing that shows very high with true B12 deficiency is the elevation of methylmalonic acid. So we typically do MMA with B12, with folate, checking all of that. But your experience has been, because the experience of some of the plant docs is that there are vegans that don't have B12 deficiency. You have not seen that with your software. Your software, you're making a statement that you've never in any case seen any vegan that did not require B12 supplementation.
I've never seen a vegan diet that was truly vegan have any B12 in it, unless, of course, it's fortified. And a lot of foods are fortified. So you can have a vegan diet that includes, say, almond milk, and the almond milk has vitamin B12 added to it. So you're not getting a deficiency if there's enough
Well,
and you drink.
you could make the case with organic food consumption, there can be bacterial composition that produces B12. It's possible, but we don't always see true B12 out and out deficiencies, even lower than the normal levels of labs. But I agree with you. Most of the vegans that I know are taking a B12 supplement, and I think it's a smart thing to do.
I would highly recommend it. The consequences are not just making more amyloid beta in the brain. You can have
red blood cell production,
deficits, blood problems, and this is a required daily nutrient. And no, the vitamin B12 has some analogs, but they're not biologically active. And so you're right, the methylmalonic acid test is better, but it's expensive and many doctors can't order it. So the regular vitamin B12 test may have to suffice for most people on most medical plans.
Well, when you look at LabCorp and you look at Quest, they actually do that pretty routinely at a level that's relatively inexpensive now. But I get your point, though. Let's segue away from that just for a second. And I want to touch on something else, and that is Parkinson's. Okay, let's talk about Parkinson's a little bit.
Yes.
Because when we talk about Parkinson's, the etiology typically is over time that you're losing dopaminergic neurons in the basal ganglia. And eventually, if they're lost enough, you don't have the regulating effect in the extra motor pathways that are involved, and you get the tremors and all of that. So let's talk about, in your experience, and especially coming back to your Diet Doctor software, because you've evaluated nutrients for a very long time. Give us a picture of how you see the eating plan and the nutrients affecting the integrity of degenerative dopaminergic neurons in the base of the brain. I'm just very curious what you've observed and what you've seen.
Well, that's great. As you know, I have a flashcard here. I know I'm old-fashioned. It's my book on Parkinson's disease. It's actually my best-selling book, and my wife has a Parkinson's cookbook that outsells me.
Well, that's great. I think it's great.
It is great because it makes it practical and easy to do it. So, step one, okay, for the symptoms of Parkinson's disease, when I analyze diets, I know that you and I should get at least 46 grams of protein a day, right?
Right.
But when I analyze most Americans, they're getting 125, 150. If they're on some paleo diet, they make it 200 or 300
Right.
grams of protein a day, vastly excess. Well, studies have shown, and the mechanism is very clear, that if you reduce your protein intake down to what you need, I'm not saying less than you need, just what you need, then you start making your own levodopa from tyrosine. The levodopa is made into dopamine. The dopamine then quiets the tremors, eases the rigidity, the face mask, all of it gets better. And I have seen this many, many times because we counseled for long, long years, many people with Parkinson's disease. And in almost every case, reducing protein helped. And studies too, by Dr. Luciana Baroni did a great study where it cut symptoms in half on the Unified Parkinson's Disease Rating Scale just to reduce protein.
Right. And so
So that's one.
but you ascribe to the idea of having about 0.36 to zero point 0.4 grams of protein per pound of body weight. They usually do it in kilos, but it's actually 0.36 to zero point 0.4, which would be exactly what you're talking about. Somewhere in that range of 40 to 50 or 60 grams of protein a day, basically, depending on
Yeah,
size
and
and
in
weight.
other words, the RDA, 46 for all adults over 50, 56 for younger men, 46 for younger women. This is the amount that we need, but nobody's getting this. Trying to help people get down to what they need
Right,
in
right, right.
protein, contrary to popular opinion, where everybody thinks, oh, I need more protein. No, need less. People are getting too much. That can interfere with your bones too.
But surely that process is happening prior to the time that you're losing those dopamine neurons. There comes a
Yeah.
point where they're degenerative and they're not producing dopamine. So you're
Well,
talking
some
about
aren't. Some aren't.
you're talking about in the stages where there's still active dopaminergic neurons to actually work with.
Oh, well, there are. There are. Typically, by the time Parkinson's disease is diagnosed, perhaps 40 to 60% of the dopaminergic dopamine producing cells have died off. That means you still have some left. So we can
Right.
work with those. Now, one thing that I've noticed that many doctors don't ask, how did they die off? Okay, this is really important to all of us who don't want to get Parkinson's or don't want it to get worse. They get worse by the contaminants, mostly in meat fat, pesticides, such as the organochlorine pesticides, well known to kill off the dopamine producing cells. Meat, chicken, fish, poultry, they all have these pesticides in the fat, and dairy products too. And so, whether it's lindane or dieldrin or heptachlor, all of the organochlorine pesticides are a big problem. They're bioaccumulated in animal fat. Also, the PCBs, the polychlorinated biphenyls and the polybrominated biphenyl ethers, these are bioaccumulated in animal fat, especially fish in this case. These are damaging and destructive, not only to the dopaminergic cells, but to the enzymes that, like tyrosine hydroxylase, that actually makes your levodopa in your body.
And
So if we,
people need to know that when you're eating those foods with those contaminants, because they are fat soluble, they become exaggerated and enhanced in our own fat tissue. And people
by
need to know
magnification.
that we become our own cause of that degeneration over time if
Yes,
we continue to
yes.
eat those foods. So that's a
Sure. So
very important point.
the animals are eating, the food with a little bit of that in it and bioaccumulating in their tissues 10, 100, 1,000 times as much of these neurotoxins. And then people eat the animals and bioaccumulate even further on a higher level. And they go to the fattiest area of the body, our brain, and they damage our brain. So it's a good reason not to eat any type of animal fat because, as you mentioned, they are lipophilic.
Yes.
So we want to preserve our brain. What kills off dopaminergic cells? The same things that kill off memory cells, inflammation and oxidation. That's what kills them off. So we need to reduce inflammation and oxidation in our brains with food, with antioxidant food, and not eat the inflammatory foods.
And again, understanding that those foods are plant exclusive foods. That's what we're talking about. So people need to hammer that home, basically.
Basically, for example, polyphenols exist exclusively in plants, and quercetin's the one Americans get the most of. And this is very protective
Right.
to our bodies. And you don't find them in any animal foods at all. And you look at vitamin C, and that's not found in any animal foods. Fiber is not found in any animal foods. Fiber goes on to reduce inflammation in the large intestine and throughout the body. So, yes, a plant exclusive diet, especially a whole plant food diet, is going to be very helpful, because if you're eating white flour, it's not going to have much in the way of helpful things. But if you're eating whole grains, then it will.
See, let's take that a step further, because there's a lot to do with the microbiome, microbiota now. We know that when we're giving those organisms the fiber that they need, which is their prebiotic nutrition, they're producing very beneficial compounds in the human body that are very supportive. When we're not giving them that fiber and we're eating animal foods and processed foods, those organisms are being shifted into more saprophytic type organisms. There's a change in the flora itself, the actual panorama, and apparently more toxic byproducts, endotoxic substances are being released, which can now damage the blood-brain barrier, get across that barrier, and affect this neurological degeneration that we're talking about. Have you found that to be something that is important to deal with?
Yes and no.
Okay.
Certainly, foods with a lot of fiber, like whole plant foods, are fabulous. But then there are foods with limited fiber, such as white rice, white flour, those type of processed foods. Then there's foods with zero fiber: oil, eggs, cheese. All
Right.
animal products have zero fiber. The fiber goes into the large intestine. It feeds the bacteria. They make butyrate and other short chain fatty acids, a principal energy source for the cells lining the large intestine.
Right.
If they don't have it, they inflame, and this is a problem. However, the endotoxins in the large intestine cannot get out. Now, it's true that with a Western diet, you can damage your large intestine barrier enough to where some can leak out. But
Well, that's what I think people are talking about. When you get that leaky gut phenomena where you're damaging that mucosa, that things can absorb and circulate via the bloodstream across all these barriers that the body is naturally used for protection.
Well, yes, but in even more recent paper of mine on lipopolysaccharides, the title is Reducing Lipopolysaccharides to Lower the Risk of Cognitive Decline in Alzheimer's Disease. What we see is the lipopolysaccharides, these endotoxins you're referring to, same thing, two names, they are actually coming from food,
Right.
not from the large intestine. The large intestine may leak a little bit, but food has a vast amount if it's the wrong food for human beings, which is just what most people eat. And so we're seeing things like macaroni and cheese, turkey prepared food, and basically meats and cheeses are the ones that have the highest levels. But these are incredibly high levels. They're shooting lipopolysaccharides in the arm of perhaps 40 nanograms. It's the tiniest amount. And yet we're looking at the number of nanograms of lipopolysaccharides in the food that people are eating, and we're seeing 500,000 and over 1,000,000 in some dishes that people are eating.
Right.
This can definitely be absorbed. My paper is on my website for free. You can just look at the top on recent papers and read that if you have a strong mind.
As you go on, before we go further, let's talk about that URL. So the name is drsteveblake.com, drsteveblake.com. We want to help people know where they can learn more about you, find out more of your information. So we just want to direct them to that URL, basically. Great.
Thank you very much. And by the way, the papers are free, and I try and keep my books all under $10 in ebook format, so anyone can.
Oh, that's fabulous. That's great. That's beautiful.
I want people to learn.
Let's talk about your cutting edge software, Diet Doctor, because you've been doing this for such a long time. Give us the real pros and the amazing things that came out of your observation of taking this nutrient inventory through this software. What are some of the most important things that have come out of those evaluations over the past 30 years?
Oh, so much fun stuff. By the way, it's up to 292,000 foods that can be chosen.
Wow.
So virtually anything from Twinkies to raw kale is in this database.
So
So
talk about how it goes into the database and how it's analyzed. Let's talk about that first.
two ways. People can buy the software and do it themselves, or people can send me their diet, just 1 day diet with exact amounts of what they ate. And I analyze that diet. I charge a small fee for that. But what they get is every essential vitamin and mineral. How much did they get? And for exclusive plant-based, it's vitamin B12. Yes, it's always zero. And vitamin D is almost always zero unless they're eating fortified foods. It's going to be. But
So
it's interesting.
you don't feel sun exposure is enough to satisfy those needs.
It's interesting. In Hawaii here, they did a study on skateboarding teenagers, and they're out in the sun all the time, and they didn't get enough vitamin D. Also, in many places in our country, photochemical smog blocks the UVB. I have a colleague who's a great expert in this. And so people aren't making enough. It's not something you want to fool around with. Vitamin D is a fantastically good anti-inflammatory, and there are vitamin D receptors throughout the body and the brain,
Absolutely,
really
absolutely.
necessary. And again, cheap, easy. Now, because I live in Hawaii, I just take 1,000 IUs, which is 25 micrograms of vitamin D3, cholecalciferol. I just take one supplement, this brain and body food, and I make it. Okay. I actually make a small profit, but a very small profit because what I put in is the real deal. And I had to make it when I did the Hawaii dementia prevention trial because people who weren't on the trial heard about these fantastic results and they wanted the supplements. They didn't want the dietary changes.
Right.
And so at least they got part of the deal there. And so I make sure I get vitamin B12, vitamin D. Also, I noticed in analyzing diets that some diets are low in calcium. For example, paleo and keto diets can be like we need on a high protein diet about 1,000 milligrams of calcium a day, typical high protein diet. On a low protein diet, 800 milligrams per day is probably fine. But I'm seeing that on paleo diets, I often see 250 milligrams of calcium. And the literature is showing they're actually getting broken bones because of calcium loss on these diets. Okay, not a good idea. Many other diets, the Atkins diet, a lot of these diets have low calcium. Also, when I look at diets from whole plant food diets and vegan diets, I'm seeing low levels of calcium, not terribly low, but low. And there's a lot of talk among us professionals about what exactly is the number we need. For me, I'd like to see 800 because as we age, and we're about the same age, then we can get broken bones. And a broken hip is the worst thing that can happen to your mobility and your freedom of life. So I want our bones to be really strong, and I want us to get 800. But my diet and the diets I analyze by vegans and plant-based people generally runs about 500 to 600 milligrams per day. So I put a boost of calcium in my supplement to knock it up that about 250 more, just so that I'm level every day. So I find that calcium can be a problem. Now, people who eat dairy products get tons of calcium, but they're getting those Parkinson's disease inducing pesticides. They're getting mucus. They're getting all kinds of
Right.
antibiotics and things. I mean, it's not a good trade-off. It's not a good way to do it. And so I analyze
No,
different diets. Every time a new
definitely
diet
not.
comes out, I analyze it. For example, I met some people who are eating a Doug Graham diet. This is a raw fruit diet, fruit only and only raw.
Doug Graham was a student of mine. I know Doug for 30, 40 years.
So I analyzed this
And
diet.
so
Wow,
what did you
35,
discover?
35 grams of protein per day, really, really, really low. Okay. Not enough to make vital enzymes, muscles, not sustainable at all. And this diet had 4,000 calories and the sugars. Wow. It's like a pound of sugar a day. And we sucrose, glucose, and fructose were through the roof the amount of sugar that people are taking in. Sure, it's fun to eat fruit and it gives you a nice little sugar buzz, but you have to be a little careful. The minerals in general, calcium was extremely low, and many of the other minerals were just plain missing. So low as to be dangerous, like zinc, selenium.
Well, Steve, let me ask you. Let me play devil's advocate. There are
Sure.
people like Doug and many followers of Doug that have actually thrived on that diet at a very high performance level. So how
Mhm.
would you explain that to that population of people?
I think that when you take someone on, especially on an American diet, and they switch to a raw fruit diet, they're going to experience wonderful benefits, and especially in their endurance and stamina, and feel better, need
Yeah,
less
but
sleep.
we're talking about people doing this for 20 plus years. Understand what I'm
That's a
saying?
problem.
So you would think some of those deficiencies would rear their ugly head in that long period of time. So
Right,
I don't advocate that diet, but I'm just playing devil's advocate
right.
because I know Doug and I know how he performs and I know, and he's been doing it for 30, 40 years.
Oh, I'd like to talk a little bit more about the Doug Graham diet. And when
Yes,
I
please
analyze it,
do
the
that.
calcium's about actually got to almost 700 milligrams per day, so almost enough calcium. The zinc, though, was about half at
Right.
7 milligrams of zinc, just not enough. The selenium, not enough at all at 25 out of 55. So that is a problem because we need those antioxidant enzymes, the superoxide dismutase, dependent on zinc and selenium, also
And
copper and
and
manganese.
and can you hear me okay?
Yeah,
Yeah, and again, of course, one of the global deficiencies, and I'm sure it's probably magnified on that eating plan too, is iodine, which of course is going to be involved in thyroid hormone production, neurological, and again, structural health too. So did you notice that too, major deficiencies with iodine?
of course, all terrestrial foods are deficient in iodine, and iodine is a required nutrient. Interesting fact, although iodine is required for the production of thyroxine by the thyroid gland, thyroxine is not the active hormone. The active hormone is triiodothyronine, and you
Right.
require selenium to get that one, which was deficient on the all fruit diet.
So there was
So,
a
as
double,
far
it
as a
was a,
long term diet, I would say you're going to need a little bit more. Vitamin E, for instance, was low. Nuts and seeds were not there, so you're not getting your alpha linolenic acid. You got just a little bit. Let me check here on ALA, that's alpha linolenic acid. In that diet was only 1.7. Not the worst I've ever seen, but not enough. But the vitamin E was really a problem, and that just wasn't enough. Now, with the gamma tocopherols and the delta tocopherols, vitamin E did look better. So I was heartened that we're getting some of the other types of vitamin E to come in, but we need the alpha tocopherol to protect our LDL on its journey through the bloodstream so it doesn't stick to the inside of the artery, create foam cells and clogging, atherosclerosis, heart attacks, strokes, and so on.
so
And I would like
the short answer is we need a very different, diverse plant exclusive diet than that one, obviously.
the short answer is we need certain nutrients as human beings. And why won't some of these authors like Atkins or whoever writes a diet plan run it through a diet analyzer and make sure it covers what humans need and doesn't give us too much of what we don't want too much of? And for example, saturated fats were fantastic on Doug Graham's diet. It's going to have a really good effect on reducing diabetes, really good effect on reducing heart attacks and strokes. So this is a really positive part of that diet, eating raw plant foods. I have analyzed some raw plant diets that were excellent and covered the nutrition humans need as well as any diet I've ever seen. But you have to be careful. You have to eat some sprouted beans. You need some nuts and seeds. And I'd like to talk about various diets. I know that Neil Barnard was on your show and he talked about his very low fat diet, like 10% of calories. And this type of diet is too restrictive. When I analyze those diets, I'm seeing the vitamin E at 5 to 10 milligrams per day. The RDA is 15 milligrams of vitamin E per day, but that is a bare minimum. If you want to, for example, boost your age related immune power, then you're going to need more like 200 or more milligrams of vitamin E. But getting too low is very dangerous. Also, you're not getting enough of the alpha linolenic acid that you mentioned, which then can be elongated and desaturated into EPA, eicosapentaenoic acid,
Right.
and then further into DHA. Now, we have the enzymes to do this, but they're not going to work unless you have every single nutrient needed for this. First of all, of course, more ALA. Then you're going to need vitamin B6 and B3. B12 is needed, and biotin. Also, vitamin E is needed for that. Calcium, magnesium, zinc, iron, and copper are needed. And you can't have excess arachidonic acid, for example, from meat fat. This is a real bad thing. So when I see the low-fat diets, I see a basic mistake being made, perhaps because my textbook on fats and oils isn't being used in medical schools, okay? But what they're doing is saying all fat is bad, keep it to 30 grams of fat a day. But the fact is, saturated fat and trans fat are the ones, trans fats, I would say 0. I'm in agreement. Arachidonic acid is a long chain omega-6 fatty acid, 0. Only comes from animal fat. We make all we need, 0. Cholesterol, we make all we need, 0 from the diet. But saturated fats you can't avoid in a good diet. And so keep it below 6% of calories, or about 12 grams per day. Then you're going to be on a healthy diet for heart attacks, strokes, diabetes, and so on. I wrote a book on diabetes.
But in a diverse plant diet, if you really look at it, we're eating a wide range of nuts, seeds, avocados, things of that nature, which will provide those oils and fats.
So no, absolutely.
And that's what I recommend. And that's what I recommend in all my teaching. So
very low-fat diets don't include those exact foods, but I certainly do. We live on an avocado orchard.
And it's a mistake. I agree with you.
It's a mistake. Too many avocados or nuts and seeds. You can get fat. That's the case. We try and limit ourselves to half an avocado a day. Some of those avocados are this big, though, that we grow. Woo, they're so good.
Well, we usually use more of the Hass avocados, which are those smaller, more dense. They're a little more dense in fat, too. But they're so tasty. They're so creamy. They're delicious.
And remember,
I probably eat at least an avocado a day.
Fantastic.
And a few ounces of walnuts a day, and I'm even using hemp seed, flax seed on oatmeal. So look, I don't have any problem with that. I've been doing that for years, and I'll tell you, it stabilizes energy. It stabilizes so many things. Well, Steve, let me ask you a question. The only way to access the Diet Doctor software is through you, or how does somebody work that? How would somebody get that? Through consulting with you?
2 ways. You can go on my website, drsteveblake.com, and buy the software and install it. It's Windows native, works on Mac with crosstalk. Or a lot easier for most people is just go ahead and communicate with me by email through my website is fine. And just say, I would like a diet analysis. And then I'll instruct them on how to let me know exactly which foods they ate in one day, how much of each, and not just I ate a green salad, but everything in the salad. So I can get it really exact down to the 100th of a gram.
But those diets can change day to day. Wouldn't it be wiser for you to have something like a week diary rather than one day?
I've been hearing that now for decades. The fact is, though, this is a teaching tool. So when people get one day's diet, there's so much to learn. Where did you get your calcium? Where did you get too much saturated fat? There was coconut oil in that thing. You didn't know it, but it really blew your saturated fat
right. blew you out the doors.
And if you're not getting quite enough zinc, what is it that you like that did have zinc? Could you eat a little more? So that one day makes all the difference. And then over time, people will then send another diet in, and it'll be usually much closer to fulfilling all of the needs the person has. And then we can fine, attune, and adjust. I do this for people all over the world and fine tune that so they get the nutrients they need.
That's great. I think it's great. So, Steve, what's on the horizon for you? What's in the works for you? Research projects, things down the road. What's coming up?
I'm a busy guy.
Well, I'm happy. That's great.
I like to stay busy. I have an active mind. And, I'm going to come back to you and say what is needed most in the area of nutritional biochemistry that I can help people with.
Well, I think the analysis is one thing, so they can get a better grasp on is their diet providing the basic things that are necessary to sustain life. I think that's the starting point.
And every doctor's office should do this. Every doctor's intake should run a dietary analysis. And of course, I basically practice non-profitable medicine or low-profit medicine.
Let me ask you a fundamental scientific question. What's the standard error in your software? How accurate are you standing behind it? And what's the research and development of the software to indicate to you that it's as accurate as you think it is? Let's talk about that.
Well, I actually designed the software as a database programmer myself, and I have tested it for long, long years. And The inaccuracies are from what people tell me. And one of them's kind of funny, because when people tell me their day diet, I'll look at it and I'll say, one time I told her, it was a Parkinson's patient. I said, "You're only giving me 1,200 calories a day. What else are you eating that you're not telling me?"
Right.
He said, "Oh, a 12-ounce bag of potato chips." Okay, well, there's the extra calories and a lot of other things in there.
Right.
People are not always saying everything they eat, because they know some things are bad and they like them and eat them anyway. So the inaccuracies usually in translating the food. If people say, I ate one avocado and a Haas avocado, well, they vary a little bit. So the vitamin C, the vitamin E, the essential fatty acids, the monounsaturated fatty acids, these all will be slightly off due to my ability to input it into the database. Once it's in as grams or fractional grams, there's no...
It's clear. It's clear as a bell at that point. Okay.
Yeah.
Steve, as we wind our discussion down, what would you like to communicate with our audience out here? Some final words.
I would sure encourage people to go more toward a whole plant diet. And as you mentioned, a varied plant diet, including vegetables, fruits, nuts and seeds, grains, and beans are especially important. If you want to continue on a whole plant diet, you need various kinds of beans, from hummus to burritos, all kinds of foods that are going to be helpful to give you what you need. Now, beans often have alpha-linolenic acid too, something I discovered in using my database.
Absolutely.
Yeah, they're good for, they're beautiful. In the database, I did one thing. I made a one food button. Okay, so you push this button on, say, pinto beans, and what happens is the program will simulate 2,000 calories of just pinto beans in a day, and you can see its strengths and weaknesses as a food. I think that's a lot of fun.
I think that's fantastic, really, truthfully. I love it.
The nutrients are invisible, most of them. Okay, carotenes you can see, but most of the nutrients are invisible and we can't see them. We need them revealed to us by analysis so that we can know how we can be ultimately healthy, keep our immune systems healthy so we don't get any viruses or bacterial infections. We need to keep our brains healthy so that that's the most important part of our body. I've seen people lose their brains, and they can lose a leg and they're still them, but they lose their brains in Alzheimer's disease and they no longer are the same person. And it's
they've lost their quality of life and their identity. It's horrible. I agree with you 100%.
It's very difficult for the caretakers too. It really, for the sake of your caretakers, eat a whole plant food diet and you're going to be really healthy. I do think that supplementation is necessary in order, not just for a plant diet, but for any of them, because we want to make sure we get everything we need every day for all of those millions of cells.
I can't thank my guest, Dr. Steve Blake, enough for joining us tonight. Steve, thank you so much. I urge people to follow Steve. You see his website, his URL scrolling across the show notes. You can follow up and have a diet analysis, take a good closer look at what your diet is actually providing. Are you getting what you need? And I think it's a legitimate question that we all need to answer in our lives. And we agree that a whole plant exclusive diet is really the way to go to minimize toxicity, to maximize nutrients. But at the same token, we want to make sure that we're getting the essentials that we need to sustain our brains, our hearts, and our bodies across time. So
not too much of those things that are problems too,
right. Like we want to find it within. Yeah, we want to find it within a proper balance for the needs of the human body, for sure. And I can't thank the people that joined us tonight enough for being part of this active and healthy community. And on behalf of the National Health Association, I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino, and I look forward to being with you on the next episode of the Health Science Podcast. Steve, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. You're doing a great job.
Thank you. You've been listening to the Health Science Podcast, brought to you by the National Health Association. Thank you for joining us today and for your commitment to evidence-based health science that backs a whole food, plant-exclusive lifestyle and contributes to the well-being of all people, animals, and our environment. I'm your host, Dr. Frank Sabatino. Be sure to leave a rating and a review, and we'll see you on the next show.